jobs are disappearing. That's true. That's fact. I'm not going to deny that we all in Europe are under threat of losing our jobs, right? But it doesn't follow that they have been stolen by the migrants. Migrants came here in the first place because their jobs disappeared, So it is a question of jobs disappearing for better or worse, but they are indeed disappearing. The skills losing their utility, they are simply becoming quickly old-fashioned, and people have to start from scratch and so on. It's all true, but connection between the arrival of migrants and the job disappearing is only very, very marginal aspect of the whole matters. The other things are for which migrants are accused is that they burden the taxpayer. They demand social services, for example, right? But social services are cut anyway because the nation state is losing its sovereignty step by step, and it has less and less power to influence things and so on. And the question whether a social state or État-providence can be maintained in one single nation state under this global condition is very difficult to answer.
As long as our countries have a strong and stronger feeling not to be able to orient national life or international life, as long as we have the impression that we are victims when we were actors in previous centuries, we'll have these processes of looking for responsibilities in marginal categories or in inferior categories. And you say, is it possible to change the causes of immigration? My normal answer is, well, we can change it, but by increasing it, because the only possibility to decrease the rate of migration is just nonsense in a global world. I mean, it is obvious that we are only beginning to live in a world of migrants. And so, but what we can change is the capacity to give to migrants the capacity to be integrated without losing all aspects of their own society and culture.
That there is an element of hypocrisy in all this politician rhetoric about migration, because economy needs migrants, not only because population is getting old, but also because there are low-paid jobs, very unpleasant jobs, which need to be performed, and they can't be performed in a virtual world. They are in service industry, in hotels, in restaurants, in all sorts of urban services, which are very unwelcome by the British.
And in agriculture.
Sorry?
And in agriculture in Spain or Italy.
Yeah, yes. Well, you see, there are the jobs which have to be performed. They are resented, however, by the local population, not because they are getting old, but simply because they are, in a very good sense of the word, spoiled by the long tradition of trade unionism, going on strikes, demanding higher wages, collective bargaining, all these self-defense apparatus which the local workers have, but pressed by the necessity, the newcomers are not chosen. They take any job, providing they can just make their living.
I do not believe that any new international order will be created. I do not think that any political agreement can be made for controlling some aspects of the economic situation. Let's take the example you mentioned, Obama. I'll refer to Obama in a second in a different way. Obama was able to avoid, with the help of some European countries, to avoid a so-called systemic crisis. But Obama, who is certainly the most powerful chief of state, was unable or did not want, doesn't matter, it doesn't make any difference, was unable to transform, to control, to put control on the financial system. Brown would probably have done something, but the city was even more reluctant to accept any kind of control. So, my view, maybe it's a bit too superficial to speak in 2 words about that, but is that the only possible forces of resistance to a global economy, when I say global, it's not international, you're absolutely right. It's the fact that it's the economic world, especially the financial world, is oriented by its internal own interest and not by functions. I mean, the financial system has almost no economic function today except some stock exchange institution which now represent a minority of the financial activities. So my view, which has probably not very much to do here, is that we are entering, or we have entered, a world in which the only possibility of opposition to a global economy and to a consumer's view of social life is, let's say, universalistic moral principle, human rights, and so on. That's why, again, women are important, or minorities are important, and so on. In Europe, I think our loss of, not identity because the word is dangerous, but of definition of ourselves, definition of our own capacity to transform our past into future, that is really disappearing. And that is why we are in a period of irrationality. Europeans were supposed to be irrational. They are probably among the most irrational people in the world because they have no future, and having no future, they now have no past. And they live in a kind of empty world.
I will start from an Irish joke. They are normally very, very illuminating Irish jokes. This one as well. A driver driving a car stopped the car, asked the passerby, "Tell me please, sir, how to go from here to Dublin?" The asked pedestrian scratches his head, thinks. And the other, "You know, sir, if I were going to Dublin, I wouldn't start from here." Now that's my answer to your question about the international politics. I think that the starting point we have dreadful, really. The very idea of international, behind which, in fact, is the other idea, even more pernicious, of interstate politics, you know, because governments meet with each other, the ministers meet with each other, you know, but not nations. The very idea of that international politics covers up, hides the emptiness which I would call global politics. And I don't see quite a straight passage. Perhaps it's my ignorance, perhaps my lack of imagination, but I don't see the bridge leading from international to global. Allegedly, the most powerful institution which we have in place, which can do it, is United Nations. But United Nations statutes, read them, they were about sanctifying the principle of territorial sovereignty of the state, fighting the threat of aggression, the only danger for which, under the impact and bitter experience of Second World War, nations came to build the United Nations organization, was to prevent violating the absolute sovereignty of the land, of the country. Now, in order to have global politics, you have to do something with this territorial sovereignty. Really, there's no other way. You can't make miracles. But governments, at the moment, which are naturally interested in not depriving themselves voluntarily with too much sovereignty, they have to decide about issues of global importance and global significance. So it's the wrong point of starting, really. And the result to which they come reminds me of, say, laws of road traffic for a city. Just imagine that in Istanbul or in Rome, actually it applies to Rome very well, but in Paris or London, you have statute books about traffic laws, which say, for example, you should not pass through red light on the crisscrossing if you signed the convention. But if you didn't sign the convention, you are free to do whatever you like. You know? So that's roughly the difference between international and global.
First, because of the general transformation of the world we described and so many people described, there are no more social movements. There are movements, no longer social movements, but cultural movements. And we have two main movements quite visible. One is more visible than the other for reasons I will explain. The main movement is ecology. Ecology is as the preoccupation with ecology is as strong as the preoccupation with economy. So the problem, culture against nature or culture with nature, interdependent, that's a fundamental fight, conflict at the world level. Here I agree. Everything is global in our time. Conflict as much as the concentration of capital and economic networks. The second one is a bit more difficult to define, but I'll try to define in two sentences. From my point of view, it's a women's movement, but for not in terms of equality. No social movement is interested in equality, it's interested in victory. And I think personally that we already are in a women's society. Why? Because in Europe, our model of modernization was concentrating all the resources, intellectual, economic, and so on, religious, in a small but strong elite, which conquered the worldwide. Arab or Chinese were more advanced, were interested in maintaining the unity of their world, so they were defeated. But little by little, this system of concentration, which supposed that the rest of the population was repressed, and in a very harsh way, in Europe especially. Now the citizens have eliminated the king, the workers have obtained some social rights, and so on and so on. So that now this European model is fundamental for understanding the crisis of Europe. Our model is now of no use. And the problem is to do exactly the contrary, to reintegrate a world which has been polarized, the anti-polarization. Women have been victims of this polarization, so they are the main agents of this reintegration.
I agree with you that there are very hopeful signs, that there are grassroots. I'm terribly sorry to say, after Professor Touraine, who said that it's end of social movements, but I think they are grassroots movements.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
And even from the top.
No, they ignore territorial boundaries, really. They act as if they believed Marx that, depressed people of all countries unite, they just ignore it. Perhaps from there it will come, but it's a long process in front of us, because the institutions, political institutions which hold actually power at the moment are not very keen on handling global issues globally.
No longer we have social movement. But yes, you're right, we have a lot of grassroots movement, especially in some countries like Mexico, for example. China has a lot of grassroots movement, but they are cut at a certain level. So we should accept the idea that conflict, agreements, will take place no longer within a certain system, national, international, economic, doesn't matter, but it will be an open conflict between, let's say, a completely secularized, a completely instrumental society and new forms of, I hate to say values, but I would use a bad word, but humanism. The struggle is within modernity between secularization and humanism. My view is, in one sentence, that we are beyond any possibility of reconciling, creating institutions or any kind of frame within which opposite interests and opposite trends would be put together, negotiate with each other, finding a relatively good, an acceptable solution and a good life. I do not believe in good life.